So, a very big welcome to all our members of Denby Dale Amateur Radio Club and friends of the club that have joined us again on YouTube. Delighted to see you this evening, and a very big welcome as well to viewers on YouTube as they join us as well for tonight's talk. First of all, just by way of introduction, I want to just sing the praises of our Tom, ZS1AFS, who is one of the members. Various members in the club in the last few years have suggested speakers we could invite to come and talk to us. And Tom suggested Glenn W0GJ, who's here tonight to talk to us. Tom said to me and sent me information about Glenn and his work in the North California DX Foundation, and the amazing support that he gave and the foundation gave to Tom as well. But he also told me to go and have a look at Glenn's QRZ page, which I've done, the amazing amount of DXpeditions you've done, Glenn, and the DX that you've both worked and activated as a radio amateur over the years. So that was enough for me to send an invite off to you, Glenn, and invite you to come and talk to us tonight. So I'd like to give a very big welcome to Glenn and hand the microphone over to you, Glenn.
All right, thank you very much, Nick. And it's always fun to give talks and meet hams around the world. It's so nice on Zoom because we can, I mean, it's 1:40 in the afternoon here in the state of Iowa, and it's a very pleasant day outside. Just beautiful. We've had some beautiful weather. It hasn't been too hot. It was pretty hot a few weeks ago. If you could let me share the screen, I will get going. I'm going to stop my video because of my bandwidth. So I'm going to stop my video.
That's fine. The share screen's already on, Glenn. So.
Oh, I see it. Okay. Yeah, I'll stop my video and go to the share screen. And share sound and video. And can you see Sable Island now?
I can indeed.
Okay, very good. Well, Nick asked me to talk about our Sable Island DXpedition that we did just a few months ago. Seems like it was just yesterday. Time just goes faster and faster all the time. But anyway, this is the story about CY0S Sable Island back in March. This is our banner that we had made for the expedition. And Sable Island is known for its wild horses, and you'll see some more of them later. Sable is about 300 kilometers east of Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's out in the North Atlantic, yes, where the storms are bad. And it's a sandbar. It's about a 40-kilometer long sandbar, but it's not very wide. It's only about a kilometer wide. And it's known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. There are at least 400 documented shipwrecks since 1500. The last one was in 1998, I believe it was, when a yacht ran aground after all their electronic equipment had failed. And, you know, back then they were still using some GPS or some other types of navigation that should have alerted them. But anyway, that was the last recorded shipwreck on Sable Island. This is the team. There were 8 of us, and most of them you've known or have seen us or worked us from other DXpeditions in the past. And 2 of the guys, Craig K9CT and John W2GD, just both competed in the WRTC a few days ago. And we had a lot of support from the Northern California DX Foundation. And this picture not just shows the banner, but the new NCDX F cold weather gear. We had some sweatshirts and some beanies that were really nice and helpful because it was pretty cold there. And I'll show you some weather statistics here in a little bit. It took 7 long years to get the permit. We applied in 2016, quite a few years ago. And it used to be really easy to go to Sable. You'd call up Environment Canada, the weather people. They'd say, we'd like to come to Sable. And they would say, how soon can you get here and how many people can you bring? That was sort of the attitude. And that's why Prior to 2016, there were a lot of DXpeditions. Some of them were maybe a week or so. Some of them were just a day or two. But there were a lot of DXpeditions prior to the early 2000s. And it all changed when Sable was declared a National Park Reserve. And you know what that means? That just means that's one way to say, no, you can't go. That's just, you know, how these organizations work sometimes. But anyway, we had to start all over, build a relationship with the parks personnel. They had no idea what ham radio was about. And of course, it's hard to understand, you know, to get them to understand why Sable was unique and special for ham radio. And since they took over, visitors cannot stay overnight unless they're weathered in, but visitors have to come and go the same day. If you're doing research, you can stay overnight. So we were officially doing ionospheric propagation research. That's what we were doing. We were researchers for the propagation. And sometimes when you work with these groups, you have to play a little poker. You know, if you say, well, we need to take 10 or 12 operators, and they say, oh, no, you can't take that many. They say you can take 8 and say, yeah, great, because that's what we were planning for anyway, was to take 8. So you got to play a little poker sometimes. But overall, Parks Canada was very, very cooperative, very, very good people. And we were going to go in 2022 when COVID hit, and in the fall, and of course that everything was closed down. And then last fall, they said, well, you can come, but we'll give you 2 weeks notice. And with our schedules and things, that just wouldn't happen. So they said, if you come in March, we can guarantee that you can be there for 10 days from March 20th to March 30th. So we said, yeah, we can go for that. So that's what we chose to do. So we locked those dates in for our DXpedition. Even though overall Sable isn't that highly most wanted, it was ranked number 49 on Club Log. And you can see in Europe, probably Western Europe, it's probably even a little bit less needed. But a lot of places need it, particularly Asia. It was pretty highly needed. And we got there with an airplane and a helicopter. The biggest factor is weight. And because of the distance and the weather involved, whatever aircraft you use can only make 1 round trip a day. And so we were limited to just under 3,000 pounds. And that included all of our clothing, all of our food. We all took freeze-dried food. We had to take sleeping bags or gear, everything to support us. Oh yeah, there were some radios and antennas and coax and things we had to take too. So you can imagine 8 guys trying to, and plus their weight, you know, their body weight, trying to get everything within under 3,000 pounds. And that was our biggest challenge, was getting that weight reduction. In fact, when we weighed in, when we loaded things, we were actually 1 pound overweight. It was really touch and go for a while. When we had some, if we were overweight, what did we have to leave behind? I mean, what could we leave behind, and what do we absolutely have to take? And actually, the airplane flies over there to support the park, and they actually offloaded 120 pounds of fuel and had about 200 pounds of fuel stashed on the island, knowing that we would be heavy. So there was not enough fuel to really make a round trip flight if the plane couldn't land over there. So anyway, they refueled the plane, and it made it just fine. But they actually offloaded and stored some fuel there, so we could get all of our gear there. And you can see the weigh-in process. Even toilet paper was weighed. I mean, everything was weighed, and we got everything packed in really nice. In the helicopter too. And the helicopter, the people that went in the helicopter had to wear survival suits. I rode in the airplane and didn't have to wear a survival suit. But here's what Sable looks like when you come up to it. It's just a long sandbar that stretches off into the horizon. And this is the runway. This is actually an official airport in Canada. It has a designation. There's actually an ATIS weather station there that broadcasts the weather continuously. So it's an official airport in Canada. And this is the plane landing. This is the compound, and this is the visitors' quarter where the researchers stay. That's where we stayed. This building is a maintenance building. This is a garage for the vehicles. There are 3 people that live there, the population of 3. There's a park ranger and a maintenance person, and they trade off every 2 months. Every 8 weeks, they trade off. Then there's a lady named Zoe Lucas who's lived there for 40 years. The people live in a house here. It's a long house. It comes over to about here, but this is where the people live. This is an automated weather station, and this is a storage building right now. So there's not too many people that live there. And that was our headquarters, the visitor center right here. And we had our antennas up. They weren't very high. They don't need to be high, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But this is what our antenna field looked like. Inside was a nice big dining area that is where we put our radios. The house is really nice. It's the winds just batter this place like you wouldn't believe, but the house was unbelievably tight from the weather and rain. And this little room is where the VHF and UHF was set up. There were 6 bedrooms that looked just like this, with 2 bathrooms. There was a nice sunroom where you could look out and see the beautiful weather that looked mostly like this a lot of times. It snowed every day, and it was very, very windy. And you can see in some of the weather maps that there's always wind in this area in the North Atlantic. It's very windy. And you can see in this weather chart here that, the wind's 46, 60 miles an hour, 32 F is 0C. So you can see the temperatures are plus or minus freezing while we were there. And if you look at Bouvet, the wind was actually a little bit higher during this time on Sable than it was on Bouvet, but still Bouvet got a lot of wind, and the temperatures maybe a little bit cooler, just below freezing more than above freezing. So it's not unlike Bouvet, except you can fly to Sable Island. There's about 600 wild horses that live on the island, and where they came from, some debate, but most people think that they came from a shipwreck several hundred years ago, and they've developed into their own species. They're officially wild horses, but they're not afraid of humans at all. In fact, they'll just walk right up to you like this. In fact, there's been so much inbreeding that we actually saw a 2-headed horse, a horse with 2 heads, if you can believe it. So I'm sure that's a 2-headed horse, but anyway, the camera angle is just right. And it's also home to about 500 seals of 3 different species. They're there all the time. And the researchers, there's a bunch of researchers that come in January and February. They had left just before we got there. They tag all of the baby seals. They spend 2 months tagging the baby seals for research purposes. And on the island, you can see it's pretty desolate. The horses live on grass, and you can see in March, there's no green grass. It's just the brown grass from the previous year, but there's several freshwater ponds. The well at the compound where we stayed is only 16 feet deep, and some of the best water I've ever had. So there is fresh water on Sable Island. This is what we usually woke up to every morning. It usually snowed every night. Sometimes it was like this during the daytime. This is the 80 and 160 meter antenna that had just come back from the Galapagos just a few days before we left. And it really worked quite well. And you can see there's wind. No matter how you guy it, it seems like the wind always manages to spoil the guy somehow for some of these flexible antennas. You can see our antennas aren't very high. They're only about 10 or 12 feet high off the ground. And this theodolite picture shows that, we're in grid FM 93 and that we're about 45 feet above sea level. And remember, this island, this sandbar is all sand. And so the ground the grounding is almost non-existent. So theoretically, these antennas were 40, 50 feet or more above the sea. So even though they looked to be maybe 10 feet above the ground, electrically, they were 45 or 50 feet above the ground. We had 4 K3s and 3 KPA 500s. And this is the dining table that now is our operating site. And we had more fun than anybody should be allowed to have. It was a lot of fun. I had just had some shoulder surgery on my dominant shoulder, and I was in an immobilizer. I could move my hand and wrist, and that was about it. But this picture proves that even with one arm tied behind my back, I can operate 2 FT8 stations. And this is our VHF station. We worked about 500 EME contacts on 2 meters and 440, and we made about just under 100 contacts on 6 meters. I think there was 1 FT8 contact, and the rest were all meteor scatter. So the E season just wasn't quite open yet. So we had a good time doing that with the EME. It was a lot of fun. Of course, we had the Northern Lights, and you know what the Aurora Oval looks like. It covered us up pretty good and limited propagation right in the middle of our operation. We were doing the CQ Worldwide Prefix Contest and sideband, and we managed to work up a pretty good score. This score is actually more than 20 million over the previous Canadian record. So we're pretty proud of that. And our operating schedule, we operated 3 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours, 3, 4, 4, 3, 4, 4, etc. And that way every operator slowly rotated through the gray line. We had 3 teams, A, B, and C, and this was our schedule. So you can see this team went 3 to 6, and then the next time they were on from 2 to 6, and etc. But that was really helpful to slowly rotate through the gray line. And after eating dehydrated food for about 8 or 9 days or so, when the pilot brings some other supplies to the compound for the park, she threw in some steaks, and oh, they were so good. So even with one arm tied behind my back, I could still grill steaks. So these guys aren't thumbs up for my cooking, of course, but for the fun that we had on Sable. This was probably the most fun DXpedition I've had, literally working the world. We were supposed to leave on March 30th, and this is what the weather looked like on Sable, but Halifax was totally socked in and nobody could fly in or out. So we were stuck, and our radios were all packed up, ready to go. There was hope that later in the day, Halifax might open up and we'd get a later flight out, but that never happened. So the Park Service took us out to the end of the island. And you can see there used to be 3 grids on Sable. We were right here just on the edge of FN93, then there's GN03, and then north of that is GN04. So Sable used to cover three different grids, and the pictures you're going to see are taken right here at this spot where the X is, right at the very edge of GN03, and this is the end of the island, and it usually extends about 4 more kilometers out behind the picture here, but Hurricane Fiora last fall totally inundated that, took it away, washed it away. So now there's no more GN04 grid on Sable Island. So those 2 grids, those 2 little subgrids are gone. So there's only 2 big grids now on Sable. And then when it was time to go, this is the next day, the next morning, it was really windy. It had actually snowed overnight, and there was about 1 inch or 2 of snow all over the island. But by the time this picture was taken and the planes were coming, most of the snow had burned off. But you can see how windy it is. If you look at the ground there, you can see the sand blowing just like snow does, when it's really windy, like in a blizzard. And we loaded up the plane and took off toward home. And I think the horses were glad to see us go. Anyway, there's been a paradigm shift in some how DXpeditions work now. I was on the VK0IR Heard Island DXpedition in 1997 and the A52A to Bhutan in 2000. And the average of those two DXpeditions made 81,000 contacts. And you can see that just over half were CW and then about 3% digital. And with Sable, a few more contacts, but still in that same range. Twice as many CW as phone, but look at this, 52% of the contacts were digital. So there's been a real paradigm shift. And, one operator, even with one arm tied behind my back, I could easily operate 2 stations. And I bet I could have operated 4 stations had we had that many stations that we could have taken. But, when the bands are open, you can run 5 streams. You can really make a lot of queues with FT8. And, use fewer streams as the propagation warrants. So you can see we made most of the contacts with FT8, some RIDI, and then again, about twice as many CW contacts as phone. And Europe, won out. We worked more Europeans than North Americans. And we were surprised at the number of Asians. We were hoping to have a little bit more, but with the conditions we had, we thought at that time, we thought it'd be less, but we actually got quite a few Asians in the station. Sable is really a special place. It's really a bad weather place. Murray, our leader, has been out there. I think this was his 7th or 8th trip out there. And he says he has never been out there when he's been able to go out and come back on schedule. There's been weather delays either going out or weather delays coming back. And we had 1 day of weather delay at the very end. But it's quite challenging weather out there, particularly in the winter, at least the end of the winter. And it's quite a place. All these places I've been have been unique, and that's probably why they're rare, And we brought amps and Yagis to try and overcome the DQRM. I don't think we noticed too much. We noticed a little bit, but not like the Bouvet guys had. I really felt sorry for them. And hopefully it wasn't too much of an impediment. And tongue in cheek, the Italians could 0 beat the last guy very well. And of course, then it's impossible to copy. So you just have to keep moving. And we saw some amazing rates, even with weak signals when the bands are open with FT8. And we were hoping for some longer openings on the higher bands, but boy, the lower bands, 30, 40, 30, 20, and 17, we really had some good JA runs, but they were maybe for an hour and a half, morning and evening, we could work JAs, worked a number on 80 meters even with CW and with digital modes. And Parks Canada team was just an amazing, they really helped us a lot. They were wonderful and understanding, and I think they were really pleased with the results of our operation, and they're using it for some publicity. And we really want to thank the Slayer and Visionaire, that's the helicopter people that got us on and off the island safely. And of course, we had a lot of supporters. We greatly appreciate that. These things can't be done without support from individuals and from foundations and clubs like you. And, it's hard to leave Sable, and hopefully the water doesn't wash away our call sign, but I'm sure it has with the storms and stuff. So where do we go next? Well, we had so much fun on Sable. The plan is to go back to St. Paul this next summer, and the Park Service will let us go from only in July and August of next summer. And the big island, there's a big island and a tiny island. And the big island is totally off limits to any human habitation or visitation. But there's a tiny island where the lighthouse is that you'll see in the video that I'm going to show momentarily. That's the only place where humans are allowed to go now. So let's take a trip to our preview trip to St. Paul for next year.
This actually is what I would consider the quintessential DXpedition location.
The CY9C base is on the site of an abandoned lighthouse on St. Paul Island. The island is about 3 miles long and 15 miles off the north tip of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. It has a little history.
We don't know. We think there's maybe over 350 wrecks. 150 years of the French. After that, the British, and then now the St. Lawrence Seaway. So everything in the Great Lakes has to come by here.
It's actually the kind of location that we look for. It's uninhabited, it's isolated.
Family of seals.
Italy Zulu 5, Canada Mike Lima 59.
Our goal here is to make as many contacts around the world with ham radio operators, and that includes hams in Japan, New Zealand, Australia. We're effectively about 125 feet above the water here, and the antenna is just so effective.
JAs are just starting to come through here on 17. Maybe we'll get that opening, the 9-10 o'clock opening that we had in 2016. I hope so.
Everyone else stop. Is Italy Kilo 2, is that Hotel Kilo Nancy? Hotel Kilo Nancy?
Okay, Roger, Kilo Nancy.
What's the beauty of the FT8?
It gets through where other things can't. We're hitting rates of about 130 an hour.
That's 130 contacts now.
An hour, yeah.
We're basically on a rock surrounded by cliffs and water.
So really the only practical way in and out of here for us is via helicopter. It's an Airbus H120, 5 passengers, driven by a 500 shaft horsepower jet engine. Flying is really amazing, and I love the changing colors of the water. I love the exotic terrain. Nothing like a pizza delivery on an uninhabited island, right?
How about that? How about that service? Wow.
It's just cool that we can talk to satellites.
Victor Echo 9, Charlie Bravo. Hey Dave, your Fox Nancy 97.
These satellites, the ones we use, are low Earth orbiting, which means they're constantly going around the Earth, and there's only so big of a footprint. So when they pass, they, only certain areas lit up at the same time. So what you do is you take something like this, just an antenna rotor and an antenna, and then when the satellite comes overhead, it tracks the antenna, and while it's tracking, you talk to the guys on the other side.
And what we have right here is the 2 meter and 6 meter stations. So over here we have 6 meters. We're running FT8 right now terrestrially. Just working EA8 to 100 watts. Over here we have 2 meters. We're doing moon bounce right now. We got our azimuth and elevation rotator here for the moon array. And if you look here, you'll see these are all the signals coming off the moon right now. We're decoding off the moon. all these signals here in the pan adapter. So we've worked on the moon this morning, so the moon's only been up for maybe half hour. Worked CT1, HZE, RX1AS, ZS1LS.
For non-ham people, what countries?
So that's Portugal, Russia, and South Africa on 2 meters.
All off the moon.
All off the moon.
We need to, I probably told you we need to check 10 fairly early on.
I like the challenge and just working with the team, you know, the camaraderie with the team members.
So after the 2019 expedition, St. Paul's Island, weather has been well, everybody's been good, and the ghosts, I haven't been here, but I'm pretty sure nobody's been haunted. A little static on the radio, maybe. They chased the FT8 guys off. That's what it is, it's ghosts.
How is that for a sunset?
Yeah, that is pretty awesome.
Fantastic. It was just an unbelievable experience. Great weather, reasonable propagation, and most importantly, just a fantastic team.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thanks again, man.
Enjoyed it.
That was fun.
You're the best.
Awesome.
Well, hopefully the 8 of us, or maybe even 10 of us, will go back to, we'll go to St. Paul this next summer. So we're looking forward to that. Any questions from anybody? I'll stop the PowerPoint and turn on my video.
Right, brilliant, absolutely brilliant, Glenn. Thanks very much indeed. Just before opening out to questions from the floor, 2 quick questions. One is CY9C next year. Is that in July, August next year, and how long are you going to be there for?
We'll probably be there for about 10 days again, but it will be sometime in July or August. We just inquired 10 days ago about what the dates were, and they hadn't set the dates yet when they would allow us on the island. We're still waiting to hear what our final dates will be.
Okay, brilliant. Well, let's throw it open to questions from the floor. Who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Who wants to go first?
I sure wish we would have had a good opening to South Africa, don't you, Tom?
I think we've lost Tom. Tom goes off to bed, Glenn. He comes in for the beginning. He comes in for the beginning and the talk, and then he gets his head down.
And he said it was past bedtime, so.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah. We see Tom for the early bit. Yeah, Darren, you're waving.
Yeah, good evening. Always 10 past bedtime. But yeah, I just wondered, how far away were you from the Titanic sinking? Because I've sailed into Halifax a few times and always passed over where the Titanic went down. And I just wish I had the money to join you guys on some of these expeditions.
Well, Sable is right on the edge of the continental shelf, and the Titanic sunk in about 2 miles of water. So it was quite a ways away. I'm sure it must have been a few hundred miles to the east and probably the north a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Well, I say when I've sailed into to Halifax, they've always thrown a reef overboard as we sailed over, but we were probably sailing more from the south, going up into Halifax. But yeah, very interesting. I love the expeditions. Like I said, I just wish I could join them.
We sure had a lot of fun. It seems like every DXpedition I go on is more fun than the last one, and this one was especially fun. Great, and it's usually a great bunch of guys, and it's just we just put our blinders on and just focus on the radio and have a great time.
Brilliant, thank you, Darren. Anyone else with a question to Glenn? Glenn, without stealing your thunder on any future questions, you've done some pretty amazing DXpeditions. Pitcairn Island, I know, is one of them, but you've been to some pretty exotic places, haven't you?
Oh yeah, I've been around the world, been there, places nobody, when you're talking to, I'll say somebody off the street and tell them they ask where you've been, they have no idea, no conception. Maybe some people have heard of Pitcairn, the Mutiny on the Bounty. That was a fascinating, that was to a civilized place, where there were people and services and a house to live in and stuff like that. But I read at least a half a dozen books about Pitcairn before we went, and the history there is just phenomenal. It's fun reading about these things. There's the Clipperton expedition is coming up, and there's a book. Thought I had it here on the shelf, but I don't see it right now. But it's the title is something like Clipperton, the island that time forgot, or something like that. But it's a fascinating story of Clipperton, and it was claimed by Mexico, and during the 1800s, about every 2 or 3 years, there was a coup and a different government took over, and they always had a military installation out there. And with all the changes, they totally forgot about the island. And it was like not 100 years, but close to that the people out there survived. And there was some intrigue and story. And if you read the book, I won't tell you what all happened, but it's a fascinating history about Clipperton, something like the Clipperton, the island that time forgot, or something like that, by Jimmy Skaggs. Jimmy Skaggs is the author. So if you want to do some research and study up before the Clipperton expedition to appreciate it more, that'd be a good book to read.
Thank you, Glenn. Good tip. Right, anyone with a question to Glenn or a comment? Everyone's gone very quiet now. No, Glenn, I just want to ask you a question about your antennas for the lower frequencies. So we saw your beams, as you said, only 10 feet above the ground for HF 20 meters up. But what were you using beneath? What were you using on 40 and 80? And I'm not sure if you made any 160 contacts, but certainly on 40 and 80.
We had a spider pole for 40 that was a full-size vertical with several ground radials, and for 80, we could switch between 80 and 160. For 80, we had a full-size quarter wave spider pole with a lot of radials. And then for 160, we would switch in a base loading unit that tuned it well for 160. So we made, even though it was kind of tough, we made, I forget exactly the numbers, but we made quite a few contacts on 160 with Europe and North America. I don't think we made any 160 contacts to Asia or Oceania, but we made quite a few to Europe and North America.
Yeah, I saw this. I recognised the spider pole, Glenn, but I wasn't sure what you were using. Whether you had wires going up them or had some kind of wire antenna fed off it. So thanks for that info. That's good. And do you know what? Just to remind people, what are the dates of the Clipperton DXpedition coming up, Glenn? You got those off the top of your head?
I'd have to look it up. I don't know. It's I think it might be January or February, but I just don't know without looking it up.
What kind of transceivers did you use, Glenn? And how did they behave?
We had K3s and KPA 500s, and they all did very well.
Okay, no interference between them or so.
No, not at all.
Okay.
But let's see,
Clipperton, yeah, it is January 24. Glenn, just looking it up now myself.
I just looked it up myself. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we hope to get everybody in the log on St. Paul this next summer. It should be easy, barring any more solar storms and, you know, aurora like we had on Sable. And, you know, you think, oh, it'd be nice to see that outside, but it's usually cloudy and, you know, bad weather, and you can't see the, you know, I remember I lived in northern Minnesota for almost 30 years, and during peak of sunspot cycles there, oh man, the sky would just be unbelievably filled, you know, from horizon to horizon, north to south, east to west, just aurora everywhere. And then when it was overcast and a dark night, no moon, you knew you could, I mean, by the resources of the internet, you knew there was a lot of auroral activity, and you could see kind of a glow through the clouds, but you just couldn't quite see it. But we never really saw it through the thick clouds on Sable.
Yeah, I mean, you should be lucky next year, Glenn, on going to CY9, given that even most of the commentators are saying the peak of the solar cycle is going to be, you know, mid-24 onwards, isn't it? Mid-24, yep, depending on who you read, but, you know, somewhere around then. So the conditions ought to be pretty good on HF.
Hopefully we'll have HF conditions on 6 meters. I know 160 is going to be noisy and it's still the summer. So 160 will be our big challenge on St. Paul.
Yeah. And my other question is has that been your experience that FT8 is now becoming quite a dominant mode for people to use on the DXpeditions, both as from the DXpedition itself and also for people trying to make the contact there?
Well, you know, a lot of weak stations, and, you know, we've compared our CW contacts, I mean, the logs with CW and logs with FT8, and they're different people. They're not duplicates a lot of the times. And there's a lot of, you know, stations that on FT8 that you can work that you just could never work otherwise because of signal strength. Yeah. But I tell you, when you sit down and do CW, you can't have more fun than that. I mean, it is just, I mean, I could sit here and punch buttons, you know, on FT8, you know, but you know, CW is still just such a thrill to operate. You know, I'm not a speed demon. You know, I'm usually 28, 30 words a minute, but, you know, we found that's the best throughput speed anyway. But, you know, you just coast along, and before you know it, that your 4-hour shift is up. It's unbelievable how fast the time goes when you're really having fun on a good CW shift.
Our Ian appreciated your comment, Glenn, about not being a speed demon. He's been, you know, turning into a great CW operator. We were in our club field a few weeks ago, and he made his first JA contact on CW. But Ian, you brought your speed up to around about 20 words a minute now. You can kind of cope with now, which is pretty good. Yeah.
And, you know, on 160 and 80, you know, sometimes, you know, 24 words a minute is too fast. You know, it just depends on the conditions. You know, I remember on Pitcairn, I did a lot of the 160 CW, and there were guys calling at 30, 35 words a minute, and with the auroral noise and just the propagation, it was just, you couldn't make out one character. I mean, you have to adjust. You have to adjust for the conditions, and that's why it's a little bit slower, and I'll say more gentlemanly, you know, on 160 and even 80, just because you almost have to go with slower speeds just because of the conditions and signal strengths.
Glenn, very interesting. I recently attended a CDXC AGM convention, and one of the issues was some of these islands, especially in the South Pacific, becoming more difficult to get authorization to do DXpeditions from. And it was suggested, you know, whether some sort of remote operation could take place from some of these islands, you know, where they're concerned about wildlife and the Fishery Protection Act, various things, and political interference, of course. And and then have some sort of link from a nearby boat, you see, to sort of relay the information. So I'm just interested in your views on this.
Yeah, I was one of the operators on the recent Ducey operation, VP6A. There were about 20 of us that operated remotely from right here where I'm sitting right now. It was a lot of fun. There are some technical issues, and it's a learning curve. The RIB, or the radio in a box, is an NCDXF project, and we're George AA7JV, the guy who was I'll say the brainchild behind it, is on a 2-year sailing trip in the Pacific to put some of these places on the air, and each time we're learning some different things, and overcoming some obstacles and things. It's getting better and better. Our biggest obstacle this time was getting the right platform to use CW and sideband on. There's a delay, and if you're on CW, you say G0 question mark, and then with the delay you come back and he's finished. Both parties have to learn to take, if there's a remote operation, have to learn to take the delay into account, because if you well, let's say you hear G0 ABC, you hear ABC, and who's the G0? When you come back, all you hear is ABC again. You don't hear the prefix because of the delay. So you don't just jump right back, but you have to account for the delay. So that's one of the obstacles we have to overcome, is just the internet delay. But we got better at it at the end. We learned, and same thing with sideband. You just have to go a little bit slower and kind of teach the crowd that they got to have a built-in delay too, so we can maximize our throughput. But there's a lot of places where I think the RIB is going to be helpful, because like our Fish and Wildlife, their biggest thing is they don't want humans on the island, to mess up, or they don't want a human infrastructure on the island to mess up, the ecology of the island. So having a RIB that's serviced once every day or every other day, just for refueling, is hopefully a lot more attractive to them. So in the future, I hope a lot of these places will open up with and allow RIB operations. And some people say, well, we've crossed the red line, it shouldn't count. But we got to go with the flow of technology and with rules and regulations. And, if we want to work these places, we got to do what we can to get them on the air. And, having a big camp and, 25 people on the island is not going to sit well with a lot of these Fish and Wildlife people. But, having an uninhabited operation with just once or every other day or so service, that's going to be a lot more attractive to them. So we got to, if we want to work these entities or get them on the air, we've got to bend a little bit.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it, Phil? And what's what you were alluding to, I guess, Glenn. People saying, well, it's not quite radio if you're sitting in your shack in the middle of the States and talking as if you were 10,000 miles away or something. But I guess everything's radio. It's all done by radio. So there's a radio transmitting signal from the island where you're putting it. It's just being operated remotely, and now the ability to do that with the computing facilities we've got, and of course the amazing, satellite internet capabilities now covering a fair section of the globe, it makes it possible, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it's and there are so many remote stations. People who lived in compromised or no antenna places, they could operate remote stations, and it's really no different. It's still all internet related. So it's like whatever it takes to get these places activated. It's the new thing, I guess.
Yeah, I'm probably one of those that's thought about that myself as well, in terms of, I know there's a number of clubs now offer to their members the ability to operate a remote station where they're living in places where it's very difficult to put up any kind of amateur radio station, whether that's, it could be an elderly person in an old people's home type setting where radio just wouldn't be allowed, or it could be someone who lives in a flat somewhere, although our Jeff out in Belgium does fantastically well with a wire and a pole off his balcony of his flat. But the ability to share a very good station just adds a new dimension to it, doesn't it? To people's ability to play with radio.
Yeah, and it's no different, I mean, the radio could be anywhere in the world. If it's on one of these rare islands, that's all the more exciting,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we can then put our hands up. Darren can put his hand up and say, "I've operated from Sable Island."
The other thing is, with the rib, we are in discussion with the Sable Island Park Service people to put a low power rib. The idea of the rib is you can take, let's say, half a dozen ribs that are high power to a remote island on a DXpedition, for a short time, 10 days, work a lot of people, or you can put one low power station on the air from someplace for a long period of time, like for 2 or 3 years, and work a lot of people. So we're in the process of working with the Sable Island Park people on getting a rib installed on Sable because there's internet and power there, and it's just a matter of literally plugging it in and having remote control with a simple antenna. So that's in discussion. It's obviously not on the air yet, but there's some technological hurdles we need to fix first, but that's would be an ideal operation for some of these places. On St. Paul, there's no power, there's no internet. That's not going to work. But for places like Sable, Pitcairn, places like that, one low power rig could do a lot over a long period of time.
Yeah, and give us all a lot of pleasure, Glenn, for the ability to listen out and tune around if we know what frequency is operating on and see when it comes up, when propagation comes up and so on. It give us a lot more ability, I guess, to work DX. That's which is the fun, isn't it?
Yep, it is. And hopefully we can get some of these on the air, for the last half of the sunspot cycle, for the next over the next few years. That will be a lot of fun. Even if it's the bottom of the sunspot cycle, it still would be interesting to, maybe 30 and 30 meters is one of my favorite bands because it's open 20 to 22 hours a day, and you never know where who's going to answer the next CQ. It could be anywhere in the world. That's one of my favorite bands to operate.
Yeah, no, I agree. I share your enthusiasm for 30. It is a much underrated band, really, in many ways. But it's absolutely right. Okay, anyone else with a question or comment they want to put to Glenn before we thank him for coming along and talking to us about Sable and making us interested in looking out for you next year on CY9C as well next summer, Glenn. That would be great.
And don't forget, you can always go to the NCDXF website and make a donation or explore what we got there on ncdxf.org.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's the commercial for this program.
Yeah, we'll happily put that in our next newsletter as well when we give a roundup of what we've been up to, Glenn. So we'll put a link on there as well. No problem at all on that. Well, look, thank you very much, Glenn. That was really interesting. The video was fabulous. Really liked the video, but it was great to hear about how you got on Sable and the conditions there, and I for one loved watching these Yagis at 10 feet above the ground. We're so used to the concept that they've got to be on the top of a mast, which is 50 or 60 foot off the ground, and here you were working DX with them 10 foot above the ground. So, and you're making the point that our Ken G4VZV makes when he goes down and works DX from the next to the salt lagoons in southern Spain. But you know, even a low power station and a simple antenna in the right location next to the sea gives you such an added boost to your ability to send signals around the world. But of course, you're better operating closer to the equator than you are closer to the North Pole. So I think Ken's been doing better in southern Spain using 70 watts and a wire antenna than you were doing up in Sable. Have we lost Glenn there?
Oh,
I think we've lost Glenn. And you, Ken. Hopefully you'll pop back in a minute.
Yeah, my internet dropped out there, so it's a good thing that didn't happen in the middle of the presentation.
You're back with us now, Glenn?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, your internet
Yeah,
dropped out.
My internet dropped out. We have we live so remote that our internet here is a wireless link. We don't have any physical internet here at all, and satellite just doesn't work for us. So it's a WiMAX from a tower about 5 miles away. So every now and then our internet drops out, and that's what happened.
No problem. I assumed it was something like that. So, okay. Well, look, before we finish and thank Glenn, just the last opportunity. Anyone else with a question or comment to Glenn? If not, Glenn, can I thank you very much indeed for a fascinating talk tonight, and we will look out for you next year when you go back to Sable, and we'll also point our members to go and look at the DX Foundation website as well, and hopefully one or two people will make a donation. I think your idea that you've posed there, Glenn, of sticking some remote stations on some of these islands that otherwise would be very difficult to activate is probably a very, very good idea, and we'd all look forward to chasing them over the 12 months of the year, wouldn't we? In different times, yep. Different bands, different conditions.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and hope to see you all on the bands, whatever mode du jour there is. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Glenn.
73s.
Thank you.